My name is Sophia Ingram, and I'm 34 years old. Last summer, I walked into my parents' house in Desert Ridge, Phoenix, my heart pounding, ready to share two pieces of news I was sure would finally make them proud. The dining room buzzed with chatter, my parents, my older brother, and my sister, all seated with their usual smug expressions. I took a deep breath, about to speak, when my father's voice cut through the room like a blade. Everything went silent. My mother smirked. My sister's lips curled into a mocking grin. Every eye was fixed on me. In that moment, I could have fought back, shouted, demanded respect. But instead, I chose something else, a slow, deliberate smile that made their expressions falter. Without saying a word, I stood, picked up my purse, and walked out into the warm Arizona night. That night, I made one decision, simple, yet powerful enough to flip everything upside down. None of them were prepared for what came next. What about you? If you were in my place, would you stay silent or fight back? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. Growing up in our family's house in Desert Ridge, Phoenix, I always felt like the odd one out. My older brother, Steven, was the golden child, a software engineer who could do no wrong. My older sister, Cheryl, was the princess, a real estate lawyer with a flashy office downtown. Then there was me, Sophia, the middle kid, always scraping by in their shadows. My parents, especially my dad, James, never let me forget it. They'd gush over Steven's tech awards or Cheryl's latest property deal, but my work, organizing events, weddings, corporate galas, charity fundraisers, barely registered. "That's cute, Sophia," my mom, Diane, would say, her tone dripping with dismissal. "But when are you going to get a real job?" I'd bite my tongue, knowing they didn't see the late nights I pulled coordinating vendors or the clients who raved about my work. Despite their indifference, I'd carved out a solid career. By 34, I'd climbed to project manager at a top event planning firm in Phoenix. Last spring, my boss called me into her office, grinning. "Sophia, you've been killing it," she said, handing me a promotion letter, senior project manager, with a raise that pushed my savings into six figures. I was thrilled, not just for the title, but for what it meant. I'd done this on my own. Then there was Evan, my fiancé, a history teacher who made me laugh like no one else. We'd gotten engaged a month before, picking out a simple ring that felt like us. I couldn't wait to tell my family, hoping, foolishly, maybe, that this time they'd finally see me. But hope came with a knot in my stomach. Family dinners at our Desert Ridge house were never just about food. They were a stage for my dad to praise Steven's latest app launch or Cheryl's $1 million condo deal, while I sat there, invisible. I'd been helping them for years, writing checks to cover their bills when things got tight, like the $1,500 a month for their mortgage or the $3,000 for my dad's heart surgery. They never asked how I managed it. They just took. My grandfather, Edward, was the only one who ever noticed. "You're doing too much for them, kid," he'd say, shaking his head during our Sunday calls. I brushed it off, thinking family was supposed to stick together. That summer, I drove to their house, my promotion letter tucked in my purse, Evan's ring glinting on my finger. I'd planned every detail of what I'd say, the promotion, the engagement, the life I was building. Maybe this time, I thought, they'd look at me and see someone worth celebrating. But as I parked in their driveway, my heart sank. I could already hear my dad's voice through the open window, boasting about Steven's new startup. Cheryl's laugh followed, sharp and smug. My mom's voice chimed in, praising Cheryl's latest court win. I gripped the steering wheel, fighting the familiar dread. Would they even care about my news? Or would they find a way to twist it, to make me feel small again? I'd spent years swallowing their jabs, comments about my frivolous job, my quiet life compared to my siblings' shining careers. Steven, with his tech bro swagger, never bothered to ask about my work. Cheryl, always in designer suits, would roll her eyes when I mentioned a client's event. My parents didn't just ignore me, they leaned on me, expecting money whenever their budget fell short. I'd paid $5,000 for Cheryl's law school fees back when she was struggling to finish her degree. They never thanked me, never acknowledged it. Yet, I kept hoping, kept showing up, kept believing one dinner could change things. I spent that afternoon in my apartment, putting the final touches on a gift I'd poured my heart into. For weeks, I'd been working on a family photo album, decades of memories, from grainy shots of my parents' wedding to Polaroids of us kids in the Desert Ridge backyard. I'd stayed up late gluing snapshots, writing captions, decorating pages with stickers. It wasn't just a gift. It was my way of saying I valued our family, even if they rarely valued me. I wanted to give it to my mom and dad before dinner, hoping it would set a warm tone for my big announcements, my promotion to senior project manager and my engagement to Evan. As I wrapped the album in gold paper, I pictured their faces lighting up, maybe even a "We're proud of you, Sophia," from my dad, James. But as I walked into their Desert Ridge house, that hope started to fray. The living room was already alive with voices. My dad stood by the fireplace, gesturing animatedly as he told a neighbor on the phone about my brother Stephen landing a big contract for his tech startup. "He's going places," James said, his voice booming with pride. I set the album on the coffee table, waiting for a chance to speak, but he didn't even glance my way. My mom, Diane, was in the kitchen chatting with my sister, Cheryl, about her latest real estate deal, a luxury condo sale that had her name in the Phoenix Business Journal. "You're unstoppable," Diane said, beaming as Cheryl laughed and flipped her hair. I hovered nearby, clutching the wrapped album, trying to join the conversation. "Hey, Mom. I brought something for you and Dad," I said, holding up the gift. Diane barely looked up. "That's nice, Sophia. Just put it somewhere," she said, turning back to Cheryl. I swallowed the sting and moved to the dining room, where Stephen was scrolling through his phone, probably checking stock prices for his company. "Hey, Stephen," I said, forcing a smile. "I made something for the family, want to see?" He grunted, eyes glued to his screen. "Later, maybe," he said, not even looking up. I stood there, feeling like a kid again, begging for scraps of attention. The album felt heavier in my hands, my excitement fading. I set it on the sideboard, telling myself dinner would be different. I'd share my news, and they'd have to listen. As I helped Diane set the table, the conversation kept circling back to my siblings. James joined us, still on about Stephen's startup. "He's pitching to investors next week," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Could be a game changer." Diane nodded, placing a platter of roasted chicken down. "And Cheryl closed that condo deal in under a month," she added, her voice brimming with awe. I tried to chime in. "That's great, but I've got some news, too," I started, but Cheryl cut me off, launching into a story about her celebrity client. I gripped a fork, my knuckles widening, and forced a nod. They didn't even notice. I took a deep breath, reminding myself why I was here. The promotion meant I was running major events, now galas, conventions, even a citywide festival. Evan, my rock, had proposed under a starry desert sky, promising a life where I'd never feel small. I deserved to share that. But as I watched my family, their voices overlapping with praise for Stephen's coding genius and Cheryl's courtroom wins, doubt crept in. Would they care about my world, or would they brush it off like they always did? The tension grew as we sat down for dinner. James carved the chicken, still talking about Stephen's latest app. Cheryl sipped her wine, smirking as Diane listed her recent accolades. I sat across from them, the album untouched on the sideboard, my news burning in my throat. I told myself to stay calm, to wait for the right moment. Maybe when I handed them the album, they'd see me differently. Maybe my promotion, my engagement would finally make them pause. Dinner was moments away, and I clung to that fragile hope. Dinner had just begun. I sat at the table, my pulse quickening as I prepared to share my news. The clink of forks and chatter filled the room, but I was ready. My promotion to senior project manager and my engagement to Evan were milestones I'd earned, and I wanted my family to know. I took a deep breath, fingers grazing the ring hidden under the table. "Everyone, I have something to tell you," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. Heads turned: James, my dad, mid-bite; Diane, my mom, holding a glass of wine; Cheryl, my sister, raising an eyebrow; Stephen, my brother, glancing up from his phone. For a moment, I had their attention, and my heart lifted. "I got promoted to senior project manager," I started, "and Evan and I are." James slammed his fork down, the sound sharp enough to stop me cold. "You're the most useless child in this house, Sophia," he said, his voice dripping with scorn. "Planning parties? That's not a real job. Why can't you be like Stephen or Cheryl?" Diane's lips curled into a smirk, her eyes glinting with amusement. Cheryl let out a biting laugh, leaning back in her chair. Stephen didn't speak, but a faint grin flickered across his face. The words landed like a slap, each one carrying years of their disregard, their refusal to see me. My chest tightened, the air heavy with their judgment. I could have fought back, listed every high-profile event I'd managed, every client who'd called me indispensable. I could have told them about the nights I'd spent perfecting proposals, or how Evan saw the strength they ignored. But their expressions, James's glare, Diane's smirk, Cheryl's mocking laugh, made it clear they'd never care. Something snapped inside me, not anger, but resolve. I didn't need their validation anymore. I smiled, slow and deliberate, watching Diane's smirk waver and Cheryl's laugh falter. The room went quiet, their eyes locked on me. Without a word, I pushed my chair back, the scrape echoing in the silence. I stood, grabbed my purse, and headed for the door. "Sophia, where are you going?" James called, his voice edged with confusion. I didn't look back. The front door shut behind me, the sound final. In my car, the warm Arizona night pressed against the windows. My hands trembled, not from hurt, but from a clarity I'd never felt before. For years, I'd kept their lives afloat, $500 a month to save their house from foreclosure, money they'd taken without a single thank you. That ended now. I pulled out my phone, typed a message to James and Diane, "No more money. Good luck." My finger hit send without hesitation. Then I powered off my phone, the screen fading to black as I tossed it aside. They could deal with the consequences. As I drove away from Desert Ridge, my smile held. I wasn't escaping, I was choosing myself. Evan was waiting at home, ready to build a future where I was enough. The road ahead felt open, unburdened by their expectations. I'd carried them for too long, and now I was free. The night stretched on, and I was ready to move forward. The next morning, sunlight slipped through my curtains, pulling me from a restless night. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up, 42 missed calls from my mom, spanning from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. And in the middle of it all, one message from my dad stood out, "Please," sent at 3 a.m. My stomach twisted, not with guilt, but with a strange calm. They'd seen my message, the one I'd sent before leaving Desert Ridge, "No more money. Good luck." I didn't expect their panic, but I wasn't surprised either. I typed a quick reply to James, "Useless is busy." Then I paused, fingers hovering over the screen. They needed to know the truth. I opened our family group chat, James, Diane, Cheryl, Stephen, and started typing. "Since you think I'm useless," I wrote, "let's clear something up. For years, I've paid $1,500 a month to cover your mortgage. I paid $3,000 for Dad's heart surgery last year. And Cheryl, I covered $5,000 of your law school fees when you were struggling. You're welcome." I hit send, the words sharp and final. I didn't wait for a reply. I set my phone to do not disturb and got ready for the day, feeling lighter than I had in years. By noon, my phone buzzed with a call from my grandfather, Edward. I answered, his familiar voice warm but firm. "Sophia, I saw your message," he said. "Good for you, kid. I'm proud you stood up." He didn't stop there. He'd called James and Diane that morning, tearing into them. "You've been bleeding her dry," he told them, his tone sharp enough to cut through their excuses. She's been carrying this family, and you call her useless? Shame on you both. I could picture Diane's face, pale and scrambling for words, James muttering defenses that wouldn't hold. Edward wasn't done. You need to figure out how to survive without her, he said, hanging up on them. I thanked him, my voice catching. You don't owe them anything, Sophia, he said. Keep shining. Back at the Desert Ridge house, my message had lit a fuse. Diane was frantic, pacing the kitchen, calling James over and over, demanding he fix this. How are we supposed to pay the mortgage now? She snapped, her voice trembling. James, usually so composed, shouted back, you think I know? She can't just cut us off. Cheryl, who'd always acted untouchable, was stunned into silence, her law school debt, my contribution, now a glaring truth. Stephen, who'd taken my support for his startup without question, stared at his phone, rereading my words. $5,000, Cheryl finally said, her voice tight. She never told me. Stephen shook his head. She didn't tell any of us. The realization hit them hard, I'd been their safety net, and they'd mocked me for it. The house erupted into chaos. Diane blamed James for pushing me away. You called her useless, she yelled, her hands shaking as she clutched her phone. James fired back, you laughed, Diane. Don't act innocent. Cheryl, usually quick to defend herself, snapped at Stephen, you knew she was helping, didn't you? Stephen denied it, his face flushed. I thought it was a loan, he shouted. The truth I'd laid bare tore through their carefully built image of me as the family's failure. They weren't just shocked, they were humiliated, forced to face how much they'd relied on the daughter they'd dismissed. I didn't see their fight, but Edward filled me in later that day. They're tearing each other apart, he said, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. I didn't gloat. I felt steady, grounded. My message wasn't just a statement, it was a line in the sand. I'd spent years propping them up, but I was done being invisible. As I sipped my coffee, I thought of Evan, of the life we were building. The family's chaos was theirs to handle now. The day was far from over, and their reckoning was just beginning. 3 weeks had passed. I was at my desk, planning a corporate gala, when my phone vibrated with a text from Evan. You okay? He asked, knowing I'd been dodging calls from Desert Ridge. I hadn't spoken to my family since the night I walked out, and I wasn't ready to. My boundaries were set, and I meant to keep them. Meanwhile, the consequences of my decision were hitting my family hard, unraveling their carefully curated lives in ways I'd only half expected. At their house, a certified letter arrived, stamped with bold red letters, final notice of foreclosure. My dad, James, ripped it open, his hands shaking as he read the bank's warning. Without my $1,500 a month, they'd missed 2 mortgage payments, and the bank was done waiting. Diane, my mom, clutched the letter, her voice rising in panic. We need to call Sophia, she said, dialing my number for the 100th time. It went straight to voicemail. My phone was still on Do Not Disturb. James paced the living room, muttering about selling his car, his pride stung by the reality of their debt. They'd relied on me for years, never imagining I'd actually stop. My sister Cheryl was reeling, too. Her real estate business, always propped up by her flashy reputation, took a hit when a major condo deal fell through. She'd counted on a quick sale to fund her next project, but without my financial support, money she'd never acknowledged, she couldn't cover the upfront costs. The client walked, and Cheryl's name, once golden in Phoenix circles, started to lose its shine. She spent hours on the phone begging investors to stay, her voice tight with desperation. I just need a little more time, she pleaded, but the damage was done. Stephen, my brother, wasn't faring much better. His tech startup, once his ticket to glory, was drowning in debt. To keep it afloat, he'd taken a second job working overnight shifts at a data center. The long hours left him exhausted, his usual swagger replaced by dark circles under his eyes. He'd assumed my contributions were endless, never questioning where the money came from. Now, faced with loan payments he couldn't meet, he was scrambling, his dreams teetering on the edge. The family's breaking point came during a group call organized by my grandfather, Edward. He'd had enough of their excuses and insisted everyone join: James, Diane, Cheryl, Stephen. I wasn't invited, and I wouldn't have answered anyway. Edward's voice crackled through the speaker, sharp and unyielding. "You've lost Sophia because of your arrogance," he said, his words aimed at James and Diane. "She paid your bills, kept your house, funded your lives, and you treated her like nothing. You're reaping what you sowed." James tried to interrupt, stammering about family loyalty, but Edward cut him off. "Loyalty? You called her useless. You don't deserve her." Diane's voice wavered, pleading ignorance, but Edward wasn't having it. "You knew exactly what she was doing for you," he said. "Now fix your own mess." The call turned into a shouting match. Cheryl accused James of driving me away with his insults. "You always favored Stephen," she snapped, her frustration spilling over. Stephen shot back, "Don't pin this on me. You took her money, too." Diane tried to play peacemaker, but her voice cracked as she admitted they couldn't afford the house without me. James, red-faced, yelled at everyone to shut up, but no one listened. Edward hung up, leaving them to stew in their chaos. He later told me it was the loudest call he'd ever heard, and he didn't regret a word. I stayed out of it, ignoring the voicemails piling up from Diane, the texts from Cheryl begging to talk. I'd spent years bending over backward for them, only to be dismissed. Now, I was focused on my life, my career thriving with new clients, my engagement to Evan, who reminded me daily that I was enough. My boundaries weren't just a line, they were a wall. And I wasn't tearing it down. Their world was crumbling, but mine was just beginning. Months slipped by. I stood in the empty living room of our new home, a cozy two-bedroom in Scottsdale, the smell of fresh paint still lingering. Evan was outside, unloading boxes from the moving truck, his laughter echoing as he joked with the movers. My phone, once buzzing with desperate calls from my family, was quiet now. I'd blocked James, Diane, Cheryl, and Stephen weeks ago, the memory of their voicemails and texts fading into a past I no longer carried. My life felt like my own for the first time, unburdened by their expectations, their judgment, their weight. At work, I'd just been named director of projects, a role I'd earned through years of late nights and flawless events. My team looked to me for guidance, trusting my vision for everything from charity galas to tech conferences. The promotion came with a raise, enough to cover the down payment on our new house. Evan and I had spent weeks house hunting, dreaming of a place where we could build our future. We'd found it, a sunny corner lot with a small backyard, perfect for quiet evenings and maybe, someday, a family of our own. As I arranged books on a shelf, I caught my reflection in a window. I was smiling, truly smiling, not the forced kind I'd worn for years. The only tie to my old life was my grandfather, Edward. He didn't call often, his hands shook too much to hold a phone for long. But his letters arrived every few weeks, handwritten on crisp stationery. "You're doing right by yourself, Sophia," he wrote in his latest one, his cursive steady despite his age. "I've always seen your strength, even when they didn't. Keep going." I kept his letters in a wooden box on my desk, each one a reminder that someone in my family believed in me. I'd write back, sharing bits of my life, my promotion, the house, Evan's proposal under the desert stars. Edward's replies were short but warm, always ending with, "I'm proud of you, kid." My family in Desert Ridge was a distant memory. I didn't know if they'd lost the house, if Cheryl had salvaged her business, or if Stephen was still burning out on night shifts. I didn't check, didn't ask. Edward never mentioned them in his letters, and I was grateful for that. Their chaos wasn't my responsibility anymore. I'd spent years pouring money and energy into their lives, only to be called useless. Now, every dollar I earned, every moment I had, was for me, for us. Evan and I were planning our wedding, a small ceremony with friends who saw me for who I was, not who I wasn't. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about the past, not with regret, but with clarity. I'd given my family everything, and they'd given me nothing but criticism. Cutting them off wasn't just about money, it was about reclaiming my worth. I'd built a career I loved, a home with the man I'd marry, a life that felt full. The weight of their dismissal, their need, their scorn, it was gone. In its place was a confidence I hadn't known I could feel, a certainty that I was enough. I walked outside to join Evan, the Arizona sun warm on my face. He handed me a box labeled "Kitchen," grinning as he teased me about my terrible packing skills. I laughed, shoving him playfully, and for a moment, the world was just us, our new home, our new life. Edward's latest letter sat on the counter inside, a quiet anchor to the family I'd chosen to keep. The rest, I'd let go. My days were full, and I was ready for whatever came next. The wedding day arrived. I stood in a flowing white dress, the desert sunset casting a warm glow over our Scottsdale backyard. Evan waited at the makeshift altar, his smile steady and sure, surrounded by twinkle lights and a handful of close friends. My grandfather Edward sat in the front row, his eyes misty but proud, the only family member I'd invited. James, Diane, Cheryl, and Stephen weren't here. Not because I'd wavered, but because I hadn't. This day was for me, for Evan, for the life we'd built without their shadows. As I walked toward Evan, gripping a bouquet of wildflowers, I felt weightless, free, in a way I'd never known. "Sophia," Evan whispered as I reached him, "you're everything." I squeezed his hand, my heart full. Edward clapped softly, his weathered hands trembling but strong in spirit. "You look beautiful, kid," he said, his voice carrying over the quiet hum of music. The ceremony was simple, vows we'd written ourselves, promises of love and partnership, no trace of the past I'd left behind. Our friends cheered as we kissed, the sound bright and unburdened. For the first time, I wasn't proving anything to anyone. I was just living. Word reached me later through a mutual friend about my family's collapse. James and Diane had lost their Desert Ridge home, forced to downsize to a cramped apartment on the edge of Phoenix. The bank had foreclosed, their savings drained without my monthly contributions. Cheryl's real estate empire had crumbled, her name, once synonymous with success, now whispered in professional circles as a cautionary tale. She'd lost more clients, her confidence shattered by deals she couldn't fund. Stephen, buried under startup debt, was still grinding through night shifts, his dreams of tech stardom fading with every unpaid bill. I didn't feel triumph, only a quiet acknowledgement that their choices had led them here. I'd learned something they never would: loving yourself means drawing a line. For years, I'd poured my energy, my money, my heart into a family that saw me as less. I'd paid their mortgage, their medical bills, their tuition, only to be mocked, dismissed, called useless. Walking away wasn't just about cutting ties, it was about choosing me. Setting boundaries didn't make me selfish. It made me whole. Every step I'd taken since, my career soaring as a project director, my home with Evan, my peace, came from that choice. I wasn't running from them. I was running toward myself. Edward's presence at the wedding reminded me of what family could be, someone who saw my worth, who celebrated me without conditions. His letters, still arriving every few weeks, were my anchor, proof that love didn't have to hurt. As I danced with Evan under the stars, I felt a truth settle in my bones. Happiness comes when you stop begging for approval and start building a life that's yours. I want to leave you with this: if you've ever felt unseen, unvalued, or trapped by those who should lift you up, know that you can choose yourself. Say no. Walk away. Build a life that makes you proud. Share your story with me. How did you find your strength? What boundaries did you set to reclaim your life? The months that followed our wedding were the most peaceful of my life. Evan and I settled into our new home in Scottsdale, filling it with laughter, shared dreams, and the quiet comfort of mutual respect. The absence of my family's constant demands created a space where I could finally breathe, where joy wasn't something I had to earn but something I could simply experience. Work continued to thrive. As director of projects, I led my team through one successful event after another. The Phoenix Business Journal even did a feature on our firm, highlighting my leadership in revitalizing the city's charity event scene. A part of me wondered if my family would see it, but the thought was a passing cloud on an otherwise sunny day. Their opinion no longer held any power over me. Edward's letters remained my cherished connection to the past. In one, he mentioned, almost in passing, that James had finally sold his prized vintage car to cover a month's mortgage. There was no judgment in his words, just a simple statement of fact. I felt a faint pang of something, not guilt, but a distant sadness for the man who had chosen pride over his own daughter. I wrote back, telling Edward about the garden Evan and I were planting, focusing on the life we were growing, not the one that had withered. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, my assistant told me I had a visitor. It was Cheryl. She stood in the doorway of my office, drenched and looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. The sharp, tailored confidence was gone, replaced by a nervous hesitation. Her designer suit was replaced by a simple, off-the-rack dress. "Sophia," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Can we talk?" For a moment, I just looked at her. The sister who had rolled her eyes at my career, who had taken my money without a second thought. The same sister I'd built pillow forts with when we were kids. The war between old loyalty and new boundaries raged inside me, but the boundaries held firm. "We can talk here," I said, my voice calm. I didn't offer her a seat. This was my space, my territory, and I would control the terms. She stepped in, wringing her hands. I don't know where to start." "Try the beginning," I said, leaning back in my chair. The power dynamic had utterly shifted, and we both felt it. "It's all fallen apart," she blurted out, her words tumbling over each other. "Mom and Dad, the bank is finalizing the foreclosure next week. They're moving into a one-bedroom apartment in Mesa. Stephen, he's working 2 jobs, he's never home, and he's so deep in debt he might lose his company anyway." I remained silent, letting her sit in the discomfort of her own confession. "And me?" Her voice broke. "I lost the big Kensington account. And then the Morrison deal fell through right after. My reputation, it's gone. They all think I'm unstable, that I can't deliver." She finally looked up at me, her eyes filled with a raw pain I'd never seen before. "They all left when the money stopped. All my friends, my investors. You were right. They were just there for what I could give them." The irony was so thick it was almost unbearable. She had become me. The overlooked. The dismissed. "Why are you here, Cheryl?" I asked, my tone even, devoid of the sympathy she was so clearly fishing for. "I thought, maybe you could." "I need a loan, Sophia. Just to get back on my feet. Just enough for a down payment on a smaller office, to show I'm still solvent. I'll pay you back, I promise." There it was. The same request, from a different mouth. The family script was so deeply ingrained it was almost tragic. "No," I said, the word clean and absolute. Her face crumpled. "Sophia, please. I have nothing left." "You have exactly what you built for yourself," I replied. "The same way I built what I have. You have your skills, your law degree. Start from there. But you won't do it with my money." Tears streamed down her face, but they weren't the manipulative tears of our childhood. These were real. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I'm so sorry for everything. For the way I treated you, for the money I took and never thanked you for. I was jealous. Stephen and I, we were so desperate for Dad's approval, and you never seemed to care. You were just good. And we hated you for it." Her apology hung in the air between us. It was what I had wanted to hear for over a decade. But hearing it now, it didn't feel like a victory. It just felt sad. "I accept your apology," I said. "But my answer is still no. This is your journey to figure out, Cheryl. Not mine." She nodded, wiping her eyes with a trembling hand. She looked defeated, but also, for the first time, clear-eyed. She had finally run out of options and excuses. "Thank you for seeing me," she said softly, and turned to leave. "Cheryl," I called out when she reached the door. She turned back. "If you ever want to have coffee and talk about something other than money, my door is open for that." A faint, grateful smile touched her lips. It was the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in years. She nodded once and left. I sat at my desk for a long time after she was gone, staring at the rain-streaked window. I felt a profound sense of closure. I had held my boundary, but I had also, in my own way, left the door open, not for the user, but for the sister who might, one day, be able to walk through it as an equal. That night, I told Evan about her visit. He listened, then pulled me close. "I'm proud of you," he said. "That must have been hard." It was, I admitted. But it was also the easiest thing in the world. Because I finally know my own worth. The chapter with my family of origin was finally, definitively closed. But my story, the one I was writing for myself, was just getting started. And it was more beautiful than I ever could have imagined. A year passed in a rhythm of quiet contentment. Evan and I fell into the easy harmony of married life, our home a sanctuary of shared coffee in the mornings and soft conversations under the stars at night. My career continued to ascend. I was now overseeing events on a national scale, my team's reputation for excellence preceding us in every major city. The past felt like a book I had closed and placed on a shelf, acknowledged, but no longer required reading. Then, one autumn afternoon, a familiar name flashed on my office phone. It was my grandfather's care facility. My breath hitched, a cold dread pooling in my stomach before I even picked up. The nurse's voice was gentle but firm. Edward had peacefully passed away in his sleep. The grief was a sharp, clean pain. He had been my anchor, my one tether to the concept of a loving family. I mourned him deeply, for the loss of his wisdom, his steady presence, his handwritten letters that would never again arrive. The funeral was a small, simple affair, just as he'd wanted. I dressed in a dark, tailored dress, Evan a solid, comforting presence at my side. We stood under a canopy of old oak trees at the cemetery, a handful of his friends and former colleagues gathered around. I had not informed my family. It wasn't out of malice, but out of a need to protect this final moment of peace for him and for myself. But as the minister began to speak, I heard the crunch of gravel on the path behind us. I didn't need to turn to know who it was. I felt their presence like a shift in the atmosphere. I turned my head slightly. They stood there, a few yards away, hesitant, James, Diane, Stephen, and Cheryl. They looked older, diminished. James's shoulders were stooped, his expensive suit replaced by a worn, ill-fitting blazer. Diane's hair was a shade too dark, grown out from a cheap dye job. Stephen looked tired, the circles under his eyes permanent. Cheryl stood slightly apart, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. They had found out. Of course they had. Death has a way of piercing even the most fortified boundaries. They didn't approach, didn't try to disrupt the service. They simply stood at the edge of the gathering, spectators to a family moment they were no longer part of. I turned back to the minister, focusing on his words about a life well lived, a man well loved. After the brief service, as people began to disperse, I felt a hand on my arm. It was Diane. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "Sophia," she said, her voice thin and raspy. "We loved him too." "I know you did," I said, my tone neutral. I gently removed my arm from her grasp. James stepped forward, clearing his throat. His pride had been sanded down by hardship, leaving behind a raw, uncomfortable vulnerability. "The house, it's gone," he said, as if I needed the update. "The apartment, it's not." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence, to admit the sheer ignominy of their situation. Stephen stared at his shoes. Cheryl met my gaze for a second, then looked away, her cheeks flushed with what might have been shame. There were no demands this time. No requests for money. There was only the stark, humbling reality of their consequences laid bare. They had come, perhaps seeking absolution, or simply because they had nowhere else to go, no other family to claim. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said, the words polite, distant, the kind you offer to an acquaintance. I turned to Evan. "I'm ready to go." As we walked away, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The image of them, standing alone and broken amidst the headstones, was seared into my memory. It was not a satisfying picture. It was a tragic one. A monument to the total cost of their arrogance and disregard. In the car, Evan took my hand. "Are you okay?" I looked out the window at the passing streets, the city moving on, oblivious to my small history of grief and resolution. "I am," I said, and realized it was true. The sight of them had stirred nothing in me but a faint, distant pity. The cords that once bound me to them, that chafed and burned for so long, had finally dissolved. They were strangers who shared my DNA, nothing more. Edward's last lesson was this: some endings are quiet. They are not explosive confrontations or dramatic pronouncements. They are the simple act of walking away from a graveside and knowing, in your soul, that the story is over. My life was my own. It was filled with love I had chosen, work I had built, and a peace I had fought for. The past had finally, completely, released its grip. I squeezed Evan's hand, focusing on the warmth of his skin, the promise of the road ahead. "Let's go home." Another year unfurled, marked by the gentle cadence of a life I had consciously built. The sharp edges of the past had softened into a collection of lessons learned, not scars carried. Evan and I were talking about starting a family, the prospect painting our future with vibrant, hopeful colors. My work was more fulfilling than ever, not because of the titles or the scale of the events, but because I led with a confidence that was entirely my own. One evening, while cleaning out a closet to make space for potential baby things, I found the wooden box where I kept Edward's letters. Sitting on the floor, I sifted through them, each envelope a touchstone of his belief in me. At the very bottom, beneath the last letter he'd sent, was a smaller, sealed envelope I didn't recognize immediately. My name was written in his shaky cursive. With careful fingers, I opened it. It was dated just a week before he passed. "My dearest Sophia, if you're reading this, I've finally gone to give your grandmother a piece of my mind for leaving me here so long. Don't be sad, kid. I had a good, long run. I'm writing this because there's one last thing I need to tell you, something I should have said out loud but couldn't find the right words for. I saw what you did for your family. I saw the weight you carried, and I saw the incredible strength it took to finally set it down. I was always proud of you, but watching you choose yourself was the proudest I ever felt. I know you've closed that door, and you were right to do it. But a man's heart gets soft at the end, and I found I couldn't completely close mine. I've left a small trust for you, Sophia. It's not from them. It's from me. It's the money from the sale of my old watch collection, something that was always just mine. I want you to use it for something that brings you nothing but joy. A down payment on a bigger house for that family you and Evan will build, a long vacation under a starry sky, anything you want. Consider it one last gift from your grandfather who always saw the remarkable woman you are. Keep shining, my girl. All my love. Edward. Tears streamed down my face, but they were warm tears of love, not of grief or anger. It was so like him, to have one last, quiet act of unwavering support waiting for me in the wings. Weeks later, a formal letter from his estate lawyer confirmed it. The sum was modest but significant, a tangible embodiment of his love and his faith in my future. Evan held me as I processed it. "What do you want to do with it?" he asked softly. I knew immediately. The money from my family had always been a chain, a transaction that demanded everything and gave nothing in return. Edward's gift was the opposite. It was pure, given with no expectation, only love. I want it to be a beginning, I said. Not a reminder of an end. We decided to use it as the seed for a college fund for our future children. It felt perfect. Edward's legacy wouldn't be about paying down a debt from the past, it would be about investing in a future full of possibility, a future he believed I deserved. One afternoon, I was finalizing details for a charity gala focused on providing scholarships for first-generation college students. As I reviewed the list of major donors, a name caught my eye, one I hadn't seen in a long time: the Ingram Family Foundation. The donation was small, almost insignificant compared to the others. A quick, curious search online revealed the truth. The foundation was just a name. It was a newly created, bare-bones nonprofit with a mission statement about supporting educational endeavors. There was no board listed, no flashy website, just a P.O. box in Mesa. It was them. It had to be. It was their clumsy, desperate attempt to somehow connect to a world of respectability they had lost, to perhaps try and say something they couldn't articulate with words. They'd seen my name associated with the event and donated a pittance, a whisper from the shadows. I sat back in my chair, a complex swirl of emotions rising in my chest. There was no anger. No desire to expose them. Instead, I felt a profound, almost weary sense of closure. I did nothing. I didn't acknowledge it. I didn't reject the donation. I simply let it be. Their gesture, however feeble, was their burden to carry, not mine. Their attempt to reach out, to perhaps seek a shred of redemption, was their own journey. It had nothing to do with me anymore. That night, I stood on the porch of our Scottsdale home, looking up at the vast, star-dusted Arizona sky. I thought of Edward's letter, tucked safely back in its box. I thought of the college fund we'd started. I thought of the family Evan and I were hoping to create, a family built on visible love, on spoken pride, on chosen respect. The past was not a ghost that haunted me. It was a foundation, however fractured, that I had used to build something stronger and more beautiful. I had chosen to turn their dismissal into fuel, their neglect into a blueprint for what not to be. The story of Sophia Ingram was no longer about the family I was born into. It was about the life I was choosing, every single day. And it was a good story. I felt Evan's arms wrap around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured. I leaned back into his embrace, into the certainty of it. "I'm thinking," I said, my voice clear and steady in the quiet night, "that everything is exactly as it should be." The final piece of my past settled into place on a crisp Saturday morning. I was 6 months pregnant, my hand instinctively resting on the swell of our daughter as I sorted through the mail. Between a catalog and a utility bill was a plain, legal-sized envelope from a law firm I didn't recognize. My first thought was Edward's estate, some last piece of paperwork. But the return address was local. Curious, I opened it at the kitchen counter, the morning sun streaming in. It was a formal notice. James Ingram had filed for bankruptcy. The document was cold and impersonal, a stark list of assets liquidated and debts discharged. The last of his pride, quantified and dissolved by the court. I read it once, then again, waiting for a tremor of emotion, schadenfreude, pity, regret. But there was nothing. It was just information. A factual update on a man who was now a stranger. The news was as relevant to my life as a weather report from another country. Evan came in, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He saw the paper in my hand, my calm expression. "Everything okay?" I handed him the notice. "My father has officially hit 0. He scanned it quickly, his brow furrowed with concern. "Sophia, are you?" "I'm fine," I said, and I truly was. I took my coffee from him. "It's just a piece of paper. It doesn't change anything." And it didn't. The life they were living, the cramped apartment, the financial ruin, the fractured relationships, was theirs to manage. Their consequences had finally become their reality, a closed ecosystem of their own making. I felt no urge to peek inside, no desire to help or hinder. My energy was reserved for the life kicking gently inside me, for the man beside me, for the future we were building. I crumpled the notice and tossed it into the recycling bin. It landed with a soft rustle, the sound of a chapter being definitively, unceremoniously, closed. Later that week, I was finalizing the last details for my maternity leave. My team had thrown me a small shower, the conference room filled with laughter and tiny, adorable outfits. As I was packing up my laptop for the day, my assistant mentioned that a delivery had been left for me at the front desk. It was a simple, unadorned white box. There was no card. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a tiny, exquisite silver rattle. It was elegant, tasteful, and clearly expensive. It was not a gift from a friend. They would have signed a card. This was different. This was an anonymous offering. I turned it over in my hands. It was exactly the kind of gift Cheryl would have chosen in her former life, a designer item meant to signal status, not warmth. But the lack of a card spoke volumes. It was a plea without words, a gesture of contrition that still couldn't quite bear to say its own name. I didn't throw it away. That would have been an action fueled by emotion, and I had none left to give them. Instead, I placed it back in the box and put it on a high shelf in the closet, next to Edward's letters. It was a part of my history, but it wouldn't be a part of my daughter's story. She would be surrounded by gifts given with love and joy, not with silent, complicated apologies from ghosts. The day our daughter was born was the brightest of my life. We named her Elara, after a moon of Jupiter, a celestial body that shone with its own reflected light. Holding her, smelling her sweet head, the world narrowed to the three of us in that hospital room. The past didn't exist. There was only this perfect, present love. In the quiet, hazy hours of new motherhood, as I nursed Elara in the dim light of her nursery, I finally understood the full circle of my journey. All the years of feeling unseen, the struggle for validation, the weight of their disregard, it had all led me here. It had taught me precisely what not to be. It had forged in me an ironclad resolve to make sure my daughter would never, for a single second, question her worth. She would grow up knowing her mother fought to break a cycle. She would be surrounded by a love that was spoken, shown, and celebrated. She would never be a secret benefactor or a silent supporter. She would be the center of a universe that delighted in her very existence. I had spent so long trying to get them to see me. Now, I was someone's entire world. One afternoon, as Elara slept in my arms, I scrolled through my phone and saw a news alert from a Phoenix business blog. Once promising tech startup founder shifts to contract work, the headline read. There was a small, grainy picture of Stephen, looking older than his years, talking to a man outside a coffee shop. I didn't click the link. I put my phone down and looked at my daughter's peaceful face. Her tiny hand was curled around my finger, holding on with a trust that was absolute and pure. The world outside was full of noise and stories of rise and fall. But in this room, there was only a profound, echoing peace. The battle was over. I had won not by defeating them, but by building a kingdom they could never reach. I had everything I had ever needed. I was finally, completely, home. The soft, milky scent of Elara was the new center of my universe. Our days were a blissful, exhausting cycle of lullabies, tiny socks, and the profound quiet of a sleeping baby nestled against my chest. The world outside our cozy Scottsdale home felt distant, its noises muffled by the overwhelming reality of motherhood. One such quiet afternoon, the doorbell rang, a sharp, intrusive sound in the naptime hush. Evan was at the store, and I moved carefully so as not to wake the baby asleep in the carrier on my chest. I peered through the peephole. My breath caught. It was Diane. She stood on my porch, looking small and strangely faded, like a photograph left in the sun. Her hands were clenched around the straps of a purse that had seen better days. She looked nothing like the smug, perfectly coiffed woman who had smirked at me across a dining room table a lifetime ago. A cold calm settled over me. This was my home. My sanctuary. She had no right to be here. I opened the door just enough to block the entrance, my body a shield protecting my sleeping daughter. "Diane," I said, my voice low and even, devoid of welcome. Her eyes, wide and desperate, darted from my face to the bundle on my chest. They lingered there, and a complex wave of emotion, longing, regret, shame, passed over her features. "Sophia," she whispered, her voice raspy. I heard. About the baby. I didn't ask how. The gossip mill in Phoenix, even in its diminished circles, evidently still turned. Yes, I said, not offering anything more. A girl? She asked, and the question was so naked, so stripped of pretense, that it almost disarmed me. Yes. She swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. I wanted to see. I wanted to, she faltered, her rehearsed lines failing her. She looked lost, standing on my welcome mat, a stranger begging for entry. I'm sorry, she finally blurted out, the words raw and broken. I am so sorry, Sophia. For everything. For the way we treated you. For the things we said. For not seeing you. The apology hung in the air between us. It was the one I had craved for decades. But hearing it now, on my doorstep, it felt like a relic from a forgotten era. It had no power to heal because the wound had long since scarred over and become part of my foundation. Thank you for saying that, I replied, my tone polite, final. It was the acknowledgement one gives a cashier or a passing neighbor. It held no warmth, no invitation for further conversation. Her face crumpled as she realized the emptiness of my response. Her apology had come years too late. It was a key for a lock that had already been changed. Her gaze dropped again to Alara, who stirred slightly in her sleep, a tiny sigh escaping her lips. The sight seemed to shatter what was left of Diane's composure. A tear traced a path through her powder. She's beautiful, she choked out. She is, I agreed, my hand coming up instinctively to cradle my daughter's head. The gesture was possessive, protective. A clear, unspoken boundary. We stood in silence for a moment, a grandmother separated from her grandchild by an uncrossable sea of past transgressions. I should go, she whispered, her shoulders slumping in defeat. She turned and walked slowly back to a faded sedan parked at the curb. She didn't look back. I closed the door, the solid click of the lock echoing in the quiet hall. I leaned against it, feeling the warm, sleeping weight of my daughter against me. My heart was pounding, but not with anger or hurt. It was pounding with a fierce, triumphant love. She had come to my door. She had seen what I had built without them. She had seen the next generation, a child who would never know their criticism, who would only know love and validation. And she had been turned away. I walked back into the living room, to the sunlit spot on the sofa where Evan and I spent our evenings marveling at our daughter. The encounter had left me not shaken, but profoundly settled. It was the final, tangible proof that my life was truly my own. They were now just people I used to know. Their apologies and their regrets were theirs to carry. They were no longer my burden. I looked down at Alara's perfect, peaceful face. Her world would be so different. It would be full of the sound of her father's laughter, her mother's proud cheers, and the unwavering knowledge that she was, and always would be, enough. The past had tried to knock, and I had not let it in. My future was right here, in my arms, breathing softly. And it was more than enough. The soft Arizona rain pattered against the windows of Alara's nursery, a gentle rhythm that usually soothed her to sleep. But tonight, she was fussy, a low, persistent cry that spoke of an earache or a dream she couldn't shake. I rocked her in the old glider, humming a lullaby, my cheek resting against her downy hair. Evan was away for a single night at a teaching conference, and the house felt vast and silent around us. My phone, charging on the dresser, lit up. The screen showed a number I didn't recognize, but with a Phoenix area code. I ignored it, focusing on my daughter. It rang again. And again. A prickle of unease, the old instinct to be on call for a family emergency, ran through me. On the fourth insistent ring, with Alara's cries escalating, I stretched out an arm and answered it, my voice tight with annoyance. Hello? The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, official. Is this Sophia Ingram? Daughter of James and Diane Ingram? My blood ran cold. Who is this? This is Officer Martinez with the Phoenix PD. There's been an incident at your parents' residence. A domestic disturbance. Your mother is being taken to County General for evaluation. Your father is in custody. The words landed like stones, one after another. Domestic disturbance. Evaluation. Custody. Elara, sensing the shift in me, began to wail in earnest. I'm not, I stammered, my mind scrambling. I'm not their emergency contact. You need to call my brother, Stephen. Or my sister, Cheryl. There was a rustle of papers. We tried, ma'am. Their numbers are disconnected. Your number was listed as an alternate. We need someone to come down. The weight of it, the sheer, pathetic tragedy of it, pressed down on me in the dim nursery. Their world had shrunk to a police report, and mine had expanded to hold a crying child whose needs were pure and immediate. I can't, I said, the words clear and solid as I bounced Elara gently. I'm sorry. I'm not available. I have an infant. There is no one else you can call. The officer was silent for a beat, perhaps processing the flat finality in my voice. Ma'am, if there's no one to assume responsibility, then the state will have to assume responsibility, I finished for him, my voice devoid of emotion. It wasn't a cruel statement. It was a factual one. They were citizens of the state now, not members of my family. I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the dresser. The silence it left behind was filled only by Elara's cries. I held her closer, her small body warm and vital against mine. Her need was real, and present, and it was my purpose. I did not call Evan. I did not panic. I rocked my daughter. I sang to her. I was her harbor in the storm, just as I had learned to be my own. Eventually, her cries subsided into hiccups, then into the steady, deep breathing of sleep. I sat there for a long time in the dark, listening to the rain and the sound of her breath. The phone did not ring again. In that quiet, a profound understanding settled over me. For years, I had carried their chaos. I had absorbed their crises and managed their disasters. I had believed that being a good daughter meant being on call for their every breakdown. But I was a mother now. My first, my only, duty was to the life in my arms. To break the cycle meant more than just refusing them money, it meant refusing them access to my peace, to my attention, to the emotional energy that belonged to my child and my chosen family. The call from the police was not a summons. It was a test. And I had passed. I laid Elara carefully in her crib, her face serene in the glow of the nightlight. I walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of water, my hands steady. I thought of them, James in a cold holding cell, Diane in a sterile hospital room, and I felt a distant, detached pity, the same way one pities characters in a sad news story. Their drama was no longer my intermission. It was a show playing in another theater, in another town. My life was here. It was in the finished bottle of milk in the sink, the tiny shoes by the door, the man who would return to us tomorrow. It was in the quiet strength of a boundary held in the middle of the night. I went to bed alone in our big bed, but I did not feel alone. I felt the entire, silent strength of the life I had built surrounding me, protecting me. Their chaos could not touch me here. It could not touch us. The rain finally stopped. Outside, the world was washed clean. And in the stillness, I knew, with a certainty that felt as deep and as calm as the night itself, that it was truly, finally, over. The fundraiser for the Phoenix Children's Hospital was the kind of event I used to only dream of managing. The main ballroom shimmered under a canopy of delicate lights, the air humming with the gentle clink of crystal and the murmur of the city's most generous patrons. I stood near the entrance, a clipboard in hand, my director's earpiece discreetly tucked away, surveying the flawless execution of my team's work. My black evening gown was armor and celebration in one. It was then I saw them. They were being ushered to a table near the back, far from the head table and the auction stage. A party of three, Cheryl, Stephen, and Diane. They looked out of place, their clothes slightly too formal, trying too hard to blend into a world that was no longer theirs. James was absent. The sight was so surreal it took me a moment to process. They hadn't seen me yet. My first instinct was a cold spike of violation. This was my world, my stage, a realm I had built through sheer force of will and talent. Their presence here felt like a trespass. Then, I saw the reason for their attendance. A man from a local tech firm, a minor sponsor we'd struggled to secure, was patting Stephen on the back with a condescending familiarity. Stephen nodded, a strained smile on his face. He was here as a guest, a +1, perhaps a last-ditch effort at networking from his new perch in contract work. He had brought them along for the night out, a glimpse of the glitter they had lost. I watched them for a moment from the shadows. Diane picked at her salad, her eyes darting around the room, wide with a mixture of awe and insecurity. Cheryl sat stiffly, her lawyer's posture still perfect, but her gaze was downcast, avoiding contact. They were spectators at a play they could no longer afford a ticket to. A year ago, the sight might have stirred a storm in me, rage, bitterness, a desire to have them removed. Now, it stirred nothing but a profound, almost peaceful, sense of distance. I made a choice. I turned to a junior coordinator. Jessica, the Van Horn party at table 12 looks a bit lost. Could you please ensure their wine glasses are filled and see if they need anything? Treat them like any other guest. She nodded, eager to please, and hurried off. I watched as she approached their table with a professional smile, refreshing their water. Diane looked startled by the attention, then offered a timid, grateful smile. That was all I would do. I would extend the same professional courtesy I would to any attendee. Nothing more. They were not my family here. They were guests at an event I was running. The distinction was everything. I moved through the crowd, greeting donors, checking in with the auctioneer, my focus absolute. I was in my element. At one point, I passed their table on my way to the stage. I felt their eyes on me, Diane's hopeful, Cheryl's ashamed, Stephen's resigned. I did not look at them. I ascended the small steps to the podium to make a brief welcome speech. The spotlight hit me, warm and blinding. I smiled out at the crowd, my voice clear and confident as it echoed through the room. I spoke about hope, about community, about the children who would benefit from their generosity. I was articulate. I was commanding. I was everything they had ever told me I couldn't be. And from my vantage point, I could see them perfectly. They were frozen, watching me, three small figures in the dim light at the back of the room. I saw the dawning, awful realization on their faces. They were not just guests at my event. They were the audience to my triumph. I was no longer the woman they could dismiss over a dinner table. I was a force in a room full of important people, and I was being listened to. I was the one with the microphone. I was the one in control. I finished my speech to warm applause. As I stepped down from the stage, a few donors stopped to congratulate me. I engaged with them warmly, never letting my gaze stray to the back table. I had given them exactly what they deserved, a perfect view of the life I had built without them, and the absolute certainty that they had no place in it. I had not acknowledged them. I had not scorned them. I had simply let them see me, in my full, unassailable power, and that was the most devastating rebuke of all. The event ended as a resounding success. As the last guests trickled out, I did a final walkthrough. Their table was empty, abandoned. 3 empty chairs, 3 unused dessert plates. They had left without trying to approach me. I stood alone in the quiet, empty ballroom, the cleanup crew beginning their work. There was no satisfaction in the victory, no petty thrill. There was only a quiet, solid finality. The door had been closed, locked, and bolted long ago. Tonight, they had simply pressed their faces against the glass and saw the bright, warm life shining inside, a life they would never be part of. I took off my earpiece, the silence it left feeling like peace. My work here was done. It was time to go home to my husband and my daughter. The fundraiser had been a success, but its afterglow was a quiet, personal one. The accolades from the board and the generous donation totals were professional satisfactions, filed away neatly. The real victory was the deep, unshakable peace I carried home. Seeing them had been the final, unexpected test, and I had passed without a single misstep. A week later, a small, flat package arrived in the mail. There was no return address, but the postmark was from Mesa. My name and address were written in a hesitant, unfamiliar script. Not Cheryl's sharp, legal hand, nor Diane's looping cursive. This was different. I opened it at the kitchen island, Ilara babbling happily in her high chair beside me. Inside, nestled between two pieces of cardboard, was a photograph. It was old, its edges softened with time. In it, I was maybe 4 years old, sitting on the shoulders of a young, smiling James. His face was unlined, his hair thick and dark. He was looking up at me with an expression of pure, uncomplicated adoration. I was shrieking with laughter, my tiny hands buried in his hair. In the background, a much younger Diane was watching us, her hand over her mouth, her eyes crinkled with genuine mirth. I didn't remember the moment. I didn't remember that version of him. That version of us. There was no note. Just the photograph. It was a weapon, of course. A grenade tossed over the high wall I'd built. It was meant to remind me of a time before the bitterness, before the comparisons, before I became useless. It was a plea for clemency from the past. I held it, feeling the glossy surface under my fingertips. For a moment, the ghost of that little girl's laughter echoed in some deep, closed-off chamber of my heart. Then, I looked at my daughter, smashing a piece of banana onto her tray with utter, joyful abandon. I saw the photo for what it was, not an invitation, but an epitaph. It was proof that the love had been real, once. And that its loss was their doing, not mine. They were the ones who had broken it. They were the ones who had chosen to replace that laughing man with a scornful critic, that joyful woman with a dismissive smirker. This image changed nothing. It only made the tragedy of their choices more profound. I didn't throw it away. That would have given it too much power, made it too important. Instead, I walked to the box in the closet where I kept the silver rattle and Edward's letters. I placed the photograph inside, face down, and closed the lid. It was a piece of my history. But it was not a blueprint for my future. That evening, I sat with Evan on the porch as the desert sky turned a deep, fiery orange. Ilara was on a blanket between us, trying to crawl after a fat, bumbling beetle. "Something came in the mail today," I said, my voice quiet. He looked at me, his gaze steady and knowing. "From them?" I nodded. "A photo. From a long time ago. Of me and my dad. When things were different." He didn't ask to see it. He simply waited, giving me the space to feel what I needed to feel. "It just made me sad for them," I said finally, watching our daughters determine progress. "They had that. And they chose to trade it for all of that." I gestured vaguely, encompassing everything that had come after. Evan reached over and took my hand. "Their loss, Sophia. Their incredible, stupid loss." And that was all there was to say. The past had sent its last, best weapon, and it had landed with a quiet thud, not an explosion. The wall had held. The kingdom was secure. I looked from my husband's loving face to my daughter's perfect, focused one, and I knew. The story wasn't about forgiveness or reconciliation. It was about preservation. It was about choosing what to let in and what to keep out. I had built a beautiful, loving world inside these walls. And some relics, even those coated in the faint gold of a forgotten happiness, were better off kept in a box. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the world in shades of violet and gold. Our future was right here, stretching out before us, bright and uncharted. And we were ready for it. The letter from the law firm arrived on a Tuesday, typed on heavy, expensive stationery. It was not about Edward's estate. It was about James's. I opened it at my kitchen counter, the same spot where I'd opened so many other missives from the past. Ilara was in her high chair, enthusiastically painting the tray with yogurt. The letter was brief and to the point. James Ingram's estate, what little there was of it, was to be divided equally among his 3 children. There was a single, specific bequest. For me, he had left the contents of a safety deposit box. A bitter, hollow laugh escaped me. What could he possibly have left me? More photographs? A stack of unpaid bills? A final, written indictment of my ingratitude? For weeks, I ignored it. The key they'd enclosed sat in a kitchen drawer, next to spare batteries and rubber bands, a tiny, metallic ghost. But curiosity, that stubborn, persistent weed, began to grow. I needed to know what his last word to me was supposed to be. I needed to face it, so I could truly be done. I went alone on a Wednesday afternoon. The bank was cool and quiet, all hushed voices and the soft clicking of keyboards. A prim banker led me to a small, private room and placed the long, metal box on the table between us. She left me alone with it. My heart thudded dully against my ribs. I fitted the key into the lock. It turned with a smooth, heavy click. Inside, there was no stack of papers. No angry letters. No photographs. There was only a single, small object, nestled on the velvety lining. It was a porcelain figurine. A shepherdess, her painted smile faint and faded, her dress chipped in one place. I picked it up, my fingers trembling. I remembered it instantly. It had sat on the corner of my father's desk my entire childhood. I'd loved it as a little girl, been fascinated by its delicate beauty. I'd been forbidden to ever touch it. And now, he had left it to me. For a long moment, I just held it, waiting for the meaning to reveal itself. Was it a peace offering? A symbol of something fragile he'd finally entrusted to me? A final, passive-aggressive reminder of something I was never allowed to have? Then, my thumb brushed against a rough spot on its base. I turned it over. There, scratched into the porcelain with what looked like a nail, was a single word. Sorry. The word was jagged, desperate. It wasn't elegantly written. It was carved. This wasn't a message drafted by a lawyer. This was a raw, clumsy act of a broken man, done alone, in some quiet moment of clarity or despair. He had taken the one object he knew I had once loved, the one thing he had withheld, and he had defaced it with the only apology he was capable of giving. A sob caught in my throat, but it wasn't one of grief. It was a wave of overwhelming, heartbreaking pity. For him. For the vast, lonely canyon that had existed between his ability to love and his ability to express it. For the fact that this crude, scratched word was the best he could do. He had died as he had lived, unable to bridge the gap. I placed the figurine back in the box. I didn't want it. Its beauty was ruined by the anguish of its message. It was a relic of a pain I had already moved beyond. I closed the lid. The click echoed in the silent room. I left the box there on the table, walked out of the bank, and stepped into the bright, warm Arizona sun. I didn't tell Evan about the figurine. I didn't tell anyone. Some truths are too heavy and too sad to share. They are yours alone to carry, not as a burden, but as a quiet understanding. His apology had come. It was too late, and it was tragically insufficient, but it had come. And in a strange way, it was the final gift he could have given me. It was confirmation that I had been right all along. My worth was not the thing that was broken. His was. That night, I sat on the floor of Alara's nursery, watching her sleep. Her chest rose and fell with the sweet, steady rhythm of absolute safety and trust. I would never make her guess if she was loved. I would never make her earn her place in my heart. My love for her would be a constant, spoken, joyous thing. The past had spoken its last, sad word. And I had finally, truly, stopped listening. My world was full of the present, of the soft sound of my daughter's breathing, and the future we would build, one filled with words that were spoken aloud, and love that was given freely, without a single, painful scratch.